Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. This video, especially those that have been following my channel for a while and my MPPL journey, will realise it's a little bit of a step back in time, but this video was all about the Ground GST and primarily the daily inspection of the trike and all the information I would need to basically DI the trike, any trike effectively, that I would be flying in the future. And that's where Mark's focus is giving me that skill set and understanding to do it safely on my own once I'm away flying. So I suggest you get a cup of tea and some biscuits, sit down, enjoy the video, and if there's any comments or any questions you've got, I can relay them to Mark. Please drop them in the comments. So let's get on with the video.
Okay, so what we need to do today is look at the ground oral side of your GST. So we know there is a flying element to passing your test, but there's actually a hanger-based portion of your test as well, called the ground oral. And as daunting as it sounds, it's actually really getting to understand your level of knowledge about the aircraft in which you fly. So whether it's a two-seat Flexwing microlight or whether it's a fixed wing, but it's relevant on type. Normally done on your own aircraft so that your examiner knows that you know how to own an aircraft, and we've discussed this before in some one-to-ones, and there's a lot of people, particularly qualified pilots, that I don't know, so therefore I don't do. So when we're teaching people to fly, particularly at airways, we want to make sure that you know how to own an aircraft as well as just flying it. The main issue being is that when you learn to fly, your skill level might be about here, and your airmanship might be just sitting above it, depending on how you're instructed. Once you qualify, you're going to be doing a lot of flying, but now unchecked, you know, you're your own instructor. And so you'll find that the skill level, your skill level increases, but unchecked, your airmanship starts to decrease. So we need to make sure that your airmanship is at a standard at the point of test, so that when your airmanship starts dropping off, it's not so much of a drastic curve, and ideally, you know, that it sort of follows the path same as your experience level, really. So the whole point of the ground oral is really to make sure that you've got a good understanding of the aircraft and that you understand what this does. Yeah. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk around and do a basic DI, daily inspection of the Flexwing microlight, or in this case a quantum Flexwing microlight. And as we're going around, I'll either give you information or ask you questions relevant on type, just to see what your level of understanding is and see if there's any gaps that we can address at this point, ready for your GST. This is what I would do with any student, regardless of experience and background, because this quantum Flexwing microlight has its own quirks, so I want to make sure that you understand these. You know, we're not going to go into specific details because a Flexwing is a Flexwing is a Flexwing, but I want to know that you have a good understanding. But again, if this was your aircraft, I would make it more relevant on type so that you knew to change the spark plugs every 25 hours. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning on any lesson that we would normally do. First thing you want to check on any aircraft before you go anywhere near it, regardless of what you're doing, is that it's safe. And then assume that everything that makes it safe is also broken. So we're always making sure that the mag switches are in the off position, so that we go anywhere near the propeller and turn it so that we aren't risking firing the engine. We also want to make sure that the battery master is off. You'll be surprised how accidentally pressing the starter button, even with the mags off, can be a very scary and dangerous situation. So yeah, so again, what you want to do is make sure that you've got a safe working area. And the other thing is make sure you've got time. It's so important that when you're planning a flight that you do account for that daily inspection. It's part of owning an aircraft. Not thinking, oh, I've got an hour, therefore I can go and fly for an hour. A good DI will take you half an hour, 45 minutes, easily. And that's if you discover no problems. First thing I want to do is come around to the nose of the aircraft, and this is where I'm checking basic component parts like aerials are attached and they're not moving around, checking the nose cone and the cowlings to make sure it hasn't received any additional hanger rash that I wasn't aware of before. This is one thing that a number of pilots aren't aware, is this is the pitot tube. Now, normal pitot tubes might have a pin in it to stop any debris going in there, but again, we operate from grass strips, so a big clump of mud on the front of there, you're not going to realise until you're in the air that your airspeed indicator isn't working. Whilst we're down here, we're going to be checking the condition of the tyre and the nose wheel struts. What would we say is the thing we're looking for, particularly on tyres of an aircraft?
Well, there's enough tread. Sidewall's not scored or cut.
Tread, bizarrely, not a massive thing, but yeah, definitely sidewall cracking. Sure. Correct tyre pressure, very important. There is working pressures, and again, this is something that you might get asked on your GST, is what's the correct tyre pressure? And it's one of those you go, some people know it. If you've read it, you'll know it. Checking the landing gear, particularly on Quantums. These work on a nylon bush that's in here, so they can get compressed quite severely. Checking things like axles and play in the nose wheel. And the more and more you get used to what it looks like, should there be a problem or the aircraft's not sitting right, that you go, well, it wasn't like that before, because you know it wasn't like that before because you've seen it. Again, working our way around, looking underneath, making sure there's not huge amounts of mud in the wheel well. So now we're working our way around and we're into the nose well of the cockpit. First thing I'm checking is things like the landing gear moves, and that things like these wheel pads aren't catching. This will limit the movement of the nose wheel. And even bizarrely, this transit bar, making sure that that hasn't started working its way out. This particular nut here is a riv nut, so that goes through there, so there's no bolt on the underside of there, it's a riv nut. So again, a little bit of Loctite, just make sure it's secure and let the ball bearing that's in there do the work. Whilst I'm here, I'm checking that the battery is secure and of the right size. I'll show you this when we get round to the other side, because this flapping around in the cockpit will change the C of G of the aircraft and also limit the movement of your nose wheel. So you don't want to discover that when you're coming in for a crosswind landing. Whilst I'm down here, supporting on the bars and making sure you've got full and free movement of the accelerator cable, and then make sure it returns. I'm also checking a number of instruments, making sure that the glass isn't broken and they're serviceable. So I will zero the altimeter at this point. It's one less thing to do when I'm doing my pre-flight checks before I go flying. Everything that's attached is secure, so this one's got an additional radio. It also has a lanyard on there and it's fixed. So this is the first time this is going to fall off, is going to be on takeoff. Moving back into the seats, making sure the seat belts are there. So making sure that these come undone under operation or under load. This backrest is held on with a zip tie. So we're making sure that it's secure and that it's locked in place and not going to fall away from us. You're not just learning to fly so you can fly on your own, you might be taking a passenger. They won't know to check seat belts. So again, you're checking the seat belts are secure. One of the things that happens a lot when flying solo is people don't check the rear seat belt. Coming back now, I work my way now onto the skirt here, so dropping the skirt. Again, little tabs, it's no effort at all just to undo them. And I'm checking things like the seat belts aren't fraying into the seats. And this should be the cleanest part of most aircraft, because I check this on every single, and I run my finger over it. So this paint that's on here is designed to crack. So should there be any loadings or any stresses, checking that your electrics are all secure. This is the gas strut to help you lower the wing on this particular aircraft. Make sure it's secure, make sure it's not coming loose. Checking things like pipes whilst we're here, making sure that any zip ties that are holding vent pipes aren't being compressed. See, that's quite nice loose on the zip ties there, so that they A, are holding them in place, but B, not restricting them. Whilst we're here, we can check the suspension. Now, we check the suspension in a number of ways. So that one way is to rotate it. An issue being is when this is now under load, it's taking the weight of the aircraft. So if there is a fracture, and I have seen this, where that bolt here is sheared from this leg, but under load, it looks all right. So by rotating it, you can see if there is any pressure or any load that's on that aircraft. We also want to check that there's movement. This is a serviceable part. So by putting your hand on the rubber, pushing against the pylon there, you can just feel movements there. So you just have a feel of that. So put your hand on the rubber, hand on the pylon, and just gently push. You can feel it compressing.
Yeah, and expand.
Yeah, yeah. Whilst we're here, we're running down, and we're checking that everything in the lower wishbone and suspension strut is all secure. Now here's a question. Spats, can you fly with them off the aircraft, or do they need to be on the aircraft?
And I would probably say you can't fly with them off the aircraft.
Yeah.
They look like an aerodynamic surface.
Yes, they're not just designed to make the wheel less draggy. To be honest, the wheel probably on their own is less draggy than the actual strut, but that's more of an aerodynamic thing. This is a huge portion of the stability of the aircraft. You can see that it's designed that the airflow travels this way, but should we change the relative airflow, say in a turn, that this flat surface offers an element of restriction and the aircraft will weathercock. So these wheel spats are very important of part of how a Flexwing will yaw in a turn.
Is that because it's behind the centre of gravity?
That's it, and if you're standing here, we're in a great position. Say that is where the centre of gravity is. You'll see that everything after the centre of gravity is a flat surface. Again, whilst we're here now, we can be checking the tyre wall and the condition of the tyres, and also the condition of the wheels. A lot of people fail to look at the actual condition of the wheels, so they are the bits that are holding the tyre to the aircraft. Again, now we're working back up towards the engine, and I always start on the carburetors. We know we've made this engine safe, but I'm going to assume that there's a fault in it somewhere because I haven't checked, so I'm never going to put myself in a dangerous situation, particularly with this propeller. So I'm always able to get to the fuel, I'm able to get to the mags, and I'm able to get away. So checking on this now, first we want to make sure that the fuel on and off tap does work, and it's literally just a one-way valve. So it's a brass brass butterfly that's in there. Now if you twist it too hard, you will break that brass, because they're not renowned for being the strongest of materials, but again, just making sure that it's not broken. I have found one that's been broken and it's been in the quarter position, so it's still been allowing fuel through, but not full fuel, but not enough fuel. So again, checking that's there. I mean, you never want to turn the fuel off on an aircraft, because one day you will forget. And I've been in that situation where I've spotted that they've turned the fuel off, and I'm sitting there going, at some point they'll notice that the fuel's not on, and we've been able to do all the pre-flight checks and taxi down to the end of the runway before we ran out of fuel. Anyway, so we're checking that the fuel tap is working and serviceable, and now we're coming around to the carburetor. So the carburetor has a number of issues and a number of obviously uses. We want to make sure that everything's working. At this moment in time, we're checking that cables and springs are all attached and they're not loose. A lot of fuel pipes are used the crimp connectors rather than these, and you look at a crimp connector and you think that's all right, it was crimped. Well, actually they might have not been fitted right, it might have degraded over the time.
You work hardening the metal to crimp it, aren't you?
It's there. So just a quick pull on the fuel pipe will save you certainly a problem. So we're checking that that's there, and then coming back to the carb sockets. So the carb sockets here. What's the issue that we have with the carb sockets or carb rubbers?
Well, it's by natural fact, it's rubber, it will degrade, it can crack.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get an incorrect air mixture. It's going to effectively make it go lean, which means you're going to get a hot engine, and it's going to eventually
exactly
seize.
Bringing us now round, we're following the air, so we're going into the manifold, which is going into the chambers. We want to make sure that the spark plugs are incorrectly secure. That's a better word. Randomly pull one off. Checking on the inside, making sure there's no corrosion inside of there as well, making sure it goes back on, and that you get used to how it feels. This is where we're now checking for leaks. Obviously water, fluids, liquids work the way down. So checking the bottom of pipes and being able to identify that these are water pipes and not oil pipes and things like that. When you do see a collection of oil forming, all that oil pipe's leaking, it's not an oil pipe, but because there's oil in there, it's easy to get drawn in. Whilst we're here, we can check the engine rubbers that are here, making sure that they aren't split and cracked, because again, that's part of the aircraft's load, and making sure that the airframe and the engine remain together at all times. So working our way around, running your hands under the oil filter, making sure that there's no oil leaking from there, running your hands under the oil radiator, making sure there's no issues there. What would happen, or you're warming your aircraft up and you see that the oil pressure started off, say, at 4 bar, which is a typical Rotax cold, and you started spotting that the oil pressure was going up, what would your thought process be?
That there's a restriction in the oil system, and it's gone into the bypass side of it, so effectively the filter's obviously blocked or something like that.
Yeah.
Is my
higher oil pressure normally indicates a blockage. Yeah. It could be in the filter element, it could be a kinked pipe, but ultimately what's your course of action?
Well, it's unsafe to fly, so I would, if it was safe to taxi back in or shut down straight away.
That's the answer. Shut down straight away, yeah. For what potentially could be a zip tie, you know, you could really damage thousands of pounds worth of, so yeah. What about the other side? Say, I mean, there's two scenarios. One, you kick over or start the engine and there's no oil pressure.
Shut down straight away.
Shut down straight away, yeah, is the right answer. What if you sat in there and as it's warming up, you're spotting that the oil pressure's going down? Gently coming down.
It's gently coming down.
Yeah, starts at 4 bar.
Yeah.
And by the time you've finished your chiff-wap checks, your pre-flights, you notice it's around about 2.5.
Well, that's normal warming up, isn't it?
Normal warming up, yeah. Why?
Because the oil's getting thinner, it's getting more able to flow because the heat is warmer.
That's exactly it, yeah. As the oil gets warmer, as it heats up, its viscosity reduces, so therefore you get less oil pressure. So what is the operating temperature on a Rotax 912?
What, for flight?
Yep.
Well, 50 degrees centigrade.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because that's the optimum point at where the oil's able to flow around the engine, isn't it?
That's exactly it. It's nothing to do with its exact temperature, more to do with the viscosity of that oil. That's what Rotax want that oil to be flowing around the engine at, because it's lubricating parts correctly. So yeah, 50 degrees is a figure there to be...
That's the magic number.
It's not just, oh, we're about 50 degrees when you're at 30. No, what you're about to do is ask that engine to give all that it's got without all of the protection that it needs. So oil pressure and oil temperature are key figures to be looking at before you take off. Water system, or at this point all we're doing is checking for leaks. This is where I do a floor check. Are there any puddles? Are there any fluids on the floor and in relationship to where it is on the particular engine? You know, making sure.
Where the knowledge of your own aircraft comes into play.
Vital, yeah, it's vital.
It's
you
not
must.
Like picking up a hire car from Hertz going, I don't know.
That's all right.
This is my aircraft. I should know where every pipe, lead,
definitely,
cable, connector, tie wrap.
And we have enough no flyable days in this country for you to spend time understanding your aircraft. Whilst we're here, we're checking again electrical connections. This is the oil temperature gauge. So making sure that that's not damaged, and this is the oil pressure gauge. Different types, and depending on the engine, the age of the engine might have a different sensor, but ultimately, again, this is the oil pump, making sure that everything's okay there. Checking the tops of these rubbers, making sure that they aren't broken. And then we do the same on this side of the engine that we did on the other, so checking spark plugs, connections, leaks. We're now bringing ourselves to the top of the engine. I'm looking down on things like the coils and the electrical connections, again, making sure that they're not rubbing on anything. Now this engine is also water cooled, so not only is the water used in a number of ways in order to add for carb heat, it's also used to cool the engine down. So we want to make sure that the coolant's right. So again, getting used to, never do this when it's hot, obviously. This is... So again, working our way around, And you can see where I position myself. I position myself this side of the landing gear, so that I can get to the oil tank. I can also get to the mag switches, I can get to the battery master, I can also sit in it if I needed to, or run away very, very quickly. Taking the cap off, you're checking if there's water. So there's just an element of water that's in here. It hasn't been run for a while, so I'll be making sure that I operated this aircraft up to at least 100 degrees to boil any water that's off in the system. Whilst we're here, so don't need to do a clear prop particularly, we know the engine's safe, I'm in a safe area, I can get to the fuel tap that's here. I'm rotating this propeller. Why am I rotating the propeller?
It's to move the oil through the system because it's not put aside.
There we go, there's a nice gurgle. Yeah, this operates on a dry sump, so it works on blowback from the pistons. It does have an oil pump though, which is connected to the crankshaft on this end. So as I'm turning the propeller, it's also turning the oil pump, and what it's doing is it's moving oil around the system, lubricating the engine before we start it up, which is fantastic. It's also moving the fuel pump, which is connected to the gearbox. So as I'm turning the propeller, not only am I priming the oil system, I'm also priming the fuel system. So now fuel that may have drained out of the carburetors or evaporated, it's now putting fuel pressure into the carburetors. It's also the water pump on this side connected to the crankshaft. So as I'm turning the propeller, it's also moving the water around the system as well. So by gurgling your engine at least, you are priming the entire engine.
Let's check your cap.
I've seen this happen a lot. Now I can check the oil, and as long as it's on the tab, we're all good. Coming back on this side, we're checking things like the brake tension. So this particular system is brakes, cables and springs and pulleys. So we make sure that that's under tension. Any electrical cables, these are the engine connections, landing light connections, that there's no issues there. And again, checking the landing gear, particularly, that's there as well. Once I'm here, I'm checking that the throttle cables are working and I have full travel on the systems. I'm looking at the carburetors as I'm doing these to make sure that everything's working. Obviously I need to check the other side, so setting that to full power. I can check the over center catch. The last thing we want is that to be off or missing. Here's a top tip. It should say top on it. Which way should that be facing? Up. Away, how simple is this? And again, seat belts are connected. And the other thing that I'm looking for, and this is what happens a lot, is making sure that this parking brake doesn't strike that battery. And the last 3 aircraft that we've had in here, 2 of them, the parking brake has struck the battery. 1 to the point where it pierced the casing. Not a particularly good scenario to be in.
No.
Making sure your battery master goes off. Finishing the check on this side, and that's the DI of a trike. For me, the trike's very simple. It's all component parts. You know, there's tricks that are specific to a Quantum. There are things that are specific to a GT450 or a Tanarg, but the wing on all Flexwings, they operate the same, and that's where I want to just give you a bit more quizzing, because there's a lot of Flexwing pilots that have no idea how these work. It's element of voodoo. So like I say, I want to do a walk around with you on the trike, but I want to ask you a few more questions and just see what your level of understanding is, particularly on how the Flexwing works. So I hope that was of some use to you. Shall we go grab a cup of coffee?
Let's do that. Thank you very much to those that have got to this far in the video. I really do appreciate it. And I hope the video was of use to all pilots of all guises, just to understand either the mindset of how we should continue learning as pilots, and those that are new to this side of flying, that it's given you some useful information. I certainly have found it, even when referring back to it, there's little bits that I missed first time round, and really enjoyed just listening to those elements of what Mark was talking about. So we'll leave this video here, and until next time everybody, fly safe.